Welcome back to the M&A Guy podcast. I'm your host, Brian Franco, founder and CEO of Meritage Partners, author of The Inevitable Exit. If you haven't got your copy, please do. We take a deep dive into what it looks like to be exit ready. And that's why I have today's guest on. Today is someone who works intimately at the intersection of these moments, right? We talked about in a business owner's journey, from succession to estate planning to protecting what you built. Trav Bowen is the founder of Private Wealth Law Group, a boutique law firm advising high net worth individual families, entrepreneurs, and closely held companies. With over 2 decades of experience, he brings a massive amount of wisdom, gold nuggets he's going to drop here for you. So thank you for joining us. And Trav, thank you for flying into this morning and to be with us.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Yeah. How were the travels?
It started
rough?
It started a little sketchy. We were delayed on the tarmac, had to turn around, go back to the gate, and we eventually got back out. So excited to be here.
I'm glad you made it safely, and I'm glad we're here as well. So, we talked about, we've had some conversation dialogue going. We actually met at an event earlier this year, which was really cool. Win the Storm. So shout out to Josie Parks out there. It was a great event. A lot of, let's just call it home services companies. Mm-hmm. And in this setting that you saw and the people that you met, they have built beautiful businesses. Some of them have bootstrapped those companies. Most of them have bootstrapped those companies. And so what's interesting to me, my observation is those very companies that they risked everything for have built most everything they have today in terms of assets. And as entrepreneurs continue in that journey, they find that the very business that made them wealthy or was the vehicle to making and creating generational wealth is the same business that they perceive to risk the wealth that they created. And so, your voice and your background and your experience shows them, how to protect that, right? Yeah. It's really, it's interesting to see that though, because you see these stories of where they started. Some of these people started from nothing, right?
Yeah. It's amazing to see. I mean, what we love in what we do is that we're working with those people, the entrepreneurs, the ones that have essentially put everything on the line to build a business, employ people. And so we want to make sure they do it right. They can protect what they have so that when that exit hopefully comes, they're ready for it.
Correct. And it will come inevitably, right? Inevitably so, as we named in the book.
Yeah.
But, that inevitable exit, it could be internal transitions, it could be external. Now, there's a variety of types of exits, right? Internal, it could be an ESOP, it could be to next tier of ownership or leadership or minority ownership. It doesn't have to be family. It could be family. Most commonly, we see children of entrepreneurs don't want mom and dad's company.
Yeah.
And, they want to pursue their passion and their dream and experience life. They envision that, right? Since they were born. So I have, some hot swap questions to go back and forth with you. You ready to dive in?
Sure.
Let's go. So Trav, many founders, obsess over the exit. A lot of conversation about this. Actually, I was on a panel at that event that you and I were talking about exactly this. But they overlook what comes after. I commonly ask the question to our clients, what are you exiting into, right? When we know what you want to exit out of, but what do you want to exit into? And so from your experience, what are the biggest mistakes that you see business owners make when they don't properly integrate estate or succession planning into an overarching exit strategy?
That's a great question. I think one of the biggest mistakes is that, before they can sell, their business has to be that the corporate records have to be up to date. They have to be pristine. And they've gone to a lot of time and labor to get that ready to go. And then they have the exit. The mistake I see often is they think, you know what? All the legal formalities that I did before the sell, the reality is those have to continue after the sale. And one of those big mistakes is that they have this pool of cash that they have. Where are they going to deploy it? And under what name or what entity should they deploy it? And the reality is, as they do that, they shouldn't do that in their name. They should do that through the proper legal structure so that the protections they enjoyed pre-transaction can be the same as they continue to go forward with their new investing or new ventures or whatever that may be.
That's right. Yeah, because in these transactions, outside of the ordinary course of business and liabilities that come along with that, there are typically clawbacks and reps and warrants in a purchase agreement. And so now none of us can protect anyone from fraud. Fraud is fraud. Like that's the F word in my vocabulary, right? And so that's just it. But if the reality is, if you're running your business, you're an honest business person, you have a good moral compass, you're doing everything right.
Yeah.
There's always these nuisance claims that can come across. And so, protecting those assets are crucial, absolutely crucial. Yeah. And, we talked about, the income that they generated over the years have created wealth. Now the income we talked about becomes the outcome in terms of tens of millions of dollars, most often is in cash, in one lump sum.
Yep.
And it doesn't feel right to them, right? Because most of these business owners are humble people. They've worked hard. It's a, what do they say? It's a marathon, not a race, right? So they just go and go.
Well, I think too, I think what we see is sometimes there's this sense of urgency to, after the sale, to do something immediately. And our advice is always, hey, why don't you sit tight, let things settle for a few months, and then let's make those decisions, and let's make sure you do them in the right way and at the right time. But I don't know if it's the money burning a hole in a pot, what that is, but I've seen certain founders who've had exits that just have this hyperventilation about the next thing. And I think the best thing is just to settle, make sure the new structure is put in place, and then start making those decisions.
So I will never win the lottery because I don't play the lottery. But if I ever did win the lottery, I always told myself since a young age, I will not spend $1 that whatever that winning is for a year. Yeah. And so I think that logic came from, the human emotion is very volatile, as we know. And so, there is a sensation or the desire like, hey, I should go buy that boat now. Well, why?
Well, I was just going to say, we've seen that as well, where, I mean, the saying is we're all poor at different levels. And I've seen some founders with exits that, man, it's where they were highly leveraged before the transaction. It's like those habits are pervasive, and then they just get something bigger. Instead of sitting back and saying, okay, how do I really do this so that these concerns I had before the sale are gone? Sometimes it just repeats itself, unfortunately.
They say entrepreneurship's not a career, it's a condition. And part of that condition is we are naturally, competitive and mostly with ourselves, right? And so you always want to see how far you can go. And you do see this, right? And it's, I've seen people, I mean, on the other side, I've seen clients win the lottery and then they sold the company.
Yeah,
which is interesting.
Yeah.
But your work often begins in our experience when the deal starts. But I finally, I recognize and I realize that the work that you do takes careful thought and planning and understanding the expectations. And if there are no expectations, helping the client get to what should my expectations be, right? Or their expectations, what should they be? But in that view, what's the ideal time that someone should call you, reach out to you, sit with you, and start planning?
Really, way before even they intend to sell is the time to plan. Certainly. But certainly, if there's discussion about a letter of intent that's being drafted, that's really kind of that's when it's almost too late. That's almost too late, because for charitable planning and other transactions, if you have a binding LOI, then some of those opportunities go away. So you have to make sure that LOI is written correctly so that they're not stopped from doing what they want to do. So that's probably, the LOI is probably the bright line.
Yeah. In the work that we do at Meritage Partners, we're preparing a client, we're taking the client to market, we're provoking investors in the marketplace to produce an offer in the form of an LOI. But there are instances where we have clients call us and they say, hey, we received this unsolicited LOI. What do we do? And, to your point, if it's a binding agreement, it's going to be difficult to undo that, especially if they signed it. the best thing that anyone could do, anyone that's listening, is engage your advisors before signing an LOI.
Absolutely.
There are things that you know, and there's more things that you typically they don't know, right? Such as the tax vehicles that are written into our tax code that is there to benefit them and to protect them and to really help them keep that wealth and protect that wealth. You still play by the rules. You just have to know what those rules are, and you do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm going to ask you a question, kind of go off script a little bit here, but my issue with business plans that are circulating the internet and templates, I talk about this a lot. None of them have an exit plan. So it's really, I always say, it's just a job description, the business plan, because you really need to have that succession, that exit plan, and surround yourself by good advisors like you and your firm. If they don't, you typically, we call it the dumb tax, right? You're going to pay the dumb tax, and you will eventually find out. But this is why I tell people, I've never lost money in business, but I paid some tuitions along the way, right? And so I want to do everything we can to avoid our clients having to pay those costly, unnecessary tuitions when they have you. I mean, you're much less expensive than some of the mistakes that they can make.
Totally.
Not that you're competing or servicing on value and price, but the reality is it's the heartache, the brain damage that they will avoid by just having that right plan. So you think, definitely before the LOI, but ideally years ahead of that. And in my example, have that succession plan, have that wealth and asset protection plan built inside your business plan.
For sure. I would say we work with a lot of, in fact, exclusively with business owners, and all of them believe they're going to sell one day.
Correct.
Where we see an issue is where the mentality is, hey, as soon as I'm ready to sell, or as soon as I get that offer, then I'll really focus on these issues. Yeah. And we're saying, hey, let's right now focus on what you've got. Let's make sure it's protected. Let's make sure it's tax efficient. And maybe you don't sell at some point, but if you're ready if we're ready, then when you sell, we're not going to have to scramble and do all the work. It'll all be done.
So when is it too late, and what are the risks of being too late?
So if there's a lot of times with founders wanting to sell and they have charitable intentions, which would include a donation to their charity of choice, or it could be a donor advised fund as the vehicle to make that donation. The further away from the transaction date, the better that is from the IRS standpoint. The IRS doesn't want you to give to charity to save tax. They want you to do it to give to charity. So the farther away that is, the better. And then depending on what there's also strategies with some estate planning techniques, whether that's a intentionally defective grantor trust or a beneficiary defective inheritors trust. All of those are taking the business interests pre-transaction, and it's really evaluation is necessary. Hopefully you're selling your interest to these trusts at a reduced value before that buyer comes in and establishes a value. So the sooner you can do that, if it were ever scrutinized by the IRS, the farther away from the transaction date, it's always better. You
talk about charitable foundations and being charitable. I've been in meetings and with a variety of clients that have historically not been charitable. But then once they just understand and can make a decision, well, yeah, I would love to be charitable. I'm fortunate enough to come into this wealth. I would love to give back to my community or to their church or whatever it may be. And the question that they often has to ask themselves is, pay the tax, create the vehicle. You could be charitable with your own directive. Yeah. The question they end up having to answer is, who do you have more confidence in that money's hands, right? Do you think that the federal government or the state or local municipal governments are going to solve those problems that you personally feel compelled to contribute to? Or do you think that's better done by a church or a 501c3 that's out there? And the answer is pretty obvious to them at that point. Yeah,
absolutely. Especially if a founder has, charitable intentions and wants to be involved, then it could, there's a few different vehicles, but a family foundation done the right way it needs employees, it needs an executive director, And so long as it's arm's length and the salaries are commercially reasonable, you can employ your own family.
Okay.
So you can take pre-tax dollars where you've made the contribution pre-transaction, and you're using that money to do good in the world, and you're engaging and employing your family members and whoever else to actually help you do that. It's pretty powerful.
It's very powerful. And so with that, part of that discovery, if you would, most everyone is charitable, whether they realize it or they don't. The more they educate themselves, the more they learn, they see the ability they have as an individual or family to impact, their local communities, which is extremely powerful. I love that. And I find that clients eventually finding ways to go ahead and be charitable, whether they had a relative that served in the military and they're donating to vets, or some people have a passion for even animals, and people have passions for their church or some sort of organization that's helping the community. And so the list goes on and on and on.
Absolutely.
But let's talk about legacy. So legacy, often used word, it can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, but the shortest definition is it's what people remember when you're no longer here on earth, is how I explain to my kids, right?
Yeah.
So when you're not here on earth, you have no really, your impact was made. You can't change that, and so when you think of the legacy and the ability that entrepreneurs have to create potentially generational wealth, right? Or personal liquidity for whatever the reason is, whatever they want to exit into. What are some of the most powerful tools that you see, or vehicles that you see, that are available to these entrepreneurs to help them with that legacy?
And this may sound funny, but the most powerful thing they can do is to have their work done. Because we meet with most entrepreneurs are type A, going a million miles an hour, and hey, I'll do this later.
Yeah.
And sometimes, when mom or dad dies, if that were to happen, it's usually the referees have died. And so if there isn't a plan, if there isn't, if the estate plan is in place at the baseline, then that legacy goes up in flames.
We've seen it.
Yeah.
You've seen it.
Money does funny things to people. And, a child's was always more loyal to mom and dad than they are their siblings, typically, because, they knew what mom wanted, they knew what dad wanted. But when they go, it's like that piece of it they have to fight for, because that's really mom and dad's legacy that they're fighting for. So at the baseline, legacy starts with making sure your plan's in place.
We have a fun game we play in our family where, everyone's always fighting for the front seat of the car, right?
Yeah.
And so my wife's gracious enough. She's like, okay, I'll sit in the back. So the question is, which of the four kids want to sit in front?
Yeah.
And they inherited something from me, and I get motion sickness very easily, right? And so everyone always fighting for front seat, as you could imagine.
Yeah.
So we say, all right, competition is, who's the favorite child of the day? And the favorite child of the day is one who behaves the most, right? But we do it in a playful way, so it's fun. So they're always competing for the front seat of the car. But what's interesting is, and I'm connecting this back to what you said, because money does funny things to people, right? And so when mom and dad aren't there to have them compete for the front seat, right? Now they're on their own.
Yeah.
And I could just imagine what that would look like if we weren't there to be those referees, as you illustrated.
Yeah.
What do you see? How do you avoid those pitfalls? How does a family preserve the legacy? It's hard to preserve relationships in an environment like that. But you can make it easier, right?
Yeah. And there's no one size fits all, really. It's really case by case.
Great point.
A lot of clients will ask us, hey, do we need to have the typical family meeting? Do we need to gather everyone and explain? And depending on your family, that could be a great solution.
Yeah.
But sometimes there could be a child or two or an in-law that makes that sort of setting impossible to include everyone. And so how do you then pivot and say, okay, what parameters, what frameworks do we need to put in the documents to make sure that any opportunity to dispute or to fight are minimized? And then you take that approach.
Yeah, there's no two deals that have ever been the same, in our instance, in your cases as well. And it's very nuanced, to say the least. You have all these different family dynamics. The themes are the same, the dynamics are different. We've seen I was talking about it earlier today. We sold a company. We were hired by a law firm. We were referred by a law firm to sell a company. We sold it to a publicly traded buyer. And I talk about this case quite often because the owner today lives in an Alzheimer's facility and has for many years. And so he doesn't know we sold the company. Obviously it was a legal transaction.
Sure.
Not trying to make it sound anything
yeah.
else but that. But there was no succession plan. And, we came in, we put the deal together, we got it done. But it was a kind of an anticlimactic moment, because yes, transaction's done, big win, but there was really no one to celebrate it with, right? In terms of servicing the client, because there's a lot of satisfaction for us in helping our
Sure.
clients figure out that puzzle piece.
And I think with going back to my example, the right family, if the characteristics are there, having discussions before is always helpful, especially when if there is a charitable intention. That's really an area where people can rally around and a family can come together and say, okay, hey, we've been really blessed.
Yeah.
And now how do we give back? And how do we use this mechanism giving back to bring us together rather than fracture what we're doing?
I'm listening to you say that. You're spot on, by the way. But I was thinking how our country's like that too, right? Because once our country could come behind a common directive or direction, we come together as Americans, right? And it's when we're divided, which, we've been in segments of that over the years, it's difficult to get anything done, right?
Yeah.
But it starts at the family. You and I both know this. And if you could get your family to talk like this in a setting that's constructive, not destructive, you're really going to help protect that legacy. And you're going to help protect the things that they could do collectively in a charitable setting or in a setting that's going to help advance the family if that's their decision, right?
Yeah. The one thing that came to mind as you were talking is we've seen, and I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, please.
Where a business owner, whether that's husband or wife or whomever, wanting to treat all the kids equally, and maybe they have a certain number of kids working in the business, others who are completely uninterested. But mom or dad has said, I want them all to be involved, so I'm going to give non-participating sibling an ownership stake in the business. And I haven't been practicing forever, but long enough, at least in my experience, I've never seen that work out really well when there is when I say succession, that could be a sell or it could be, a premature death. It's just tough when kids aren't involved, have no appreciation for the sacrifice to get involved. So we typically steer clear and advise clients not to do that. Find other ways to treat the kids equally, but not through the business.
I have so many thoughts on this.
And disagree with me if you.
I'm totally agreeing with you. The reality is whether they're family or there's ESOPs, right? Employee stock ownership programs. Not all employees want to be an owner of a company, right? They just don't, right? And so when there's an ESOP, they are issued memberships or stocks, and it doesn't have much value to it, right? And I think it's mostly because they don't understand it, but also if there's no cost, there's no value.
Exactly.
And so that I start with that because that's the most logical setting I could think of, but I'm going to apply that to the family setting now. Okay. In the family setting, mom and dad want to be fair, right? Mm-hmm. If we're going to spend $100 on Christmas per kid, everyone's going to $100 gift, right? Yeah. That works there. Yeah. It does not work when it comes to the business because the business has to be treated not like a child, but it is its own entity. Yeah. It's its own being, absolutely. Right? And quite honestly, as you know, that business can outlive anyone here on earth. Yeah. And there's companies generational businesses that have been around since the 1800s. And, you're talking 3 generations. Yeah. We're working on a case right now. The business started in 1920. Really? 3rd generation of ownership, right? And so it's difficult when mom and dad with good heart, good intentions want to equally spread the wealth or whatever, however they justify that decision in their mind. Here's the outcome. The outcome is this. The business goes on. You have some participating, some not. Those that are participating, they're putting their blood, sweat, and their tears. Maybe they're sacrificing young years of their children. Maybe they're sacrificing travel and vacation. And so it's human nature that with that hard work, most of us are okay with, most of us are, but there has to be that reward, right? And that reward is not necessarily, I mean, sometimes it's just acknowledgement. It doesn't have to be monetary,
Right.
but that's not going to happen when you have good intention, you give equal ownership. It's very destructive to the business, especially if that ownership comes with voting rights.
Yeah.
I mean, would you, or, and I know the answer is no, it's a rhetorical question, but would you give someone, that you've been friends with voting rights in your company because you like them? And you're like, no, I mean, why would you do that with your family, right? Because you are a fiduciary. I am a fiduciary. You're a fiduciary to your business.
Yeah.
And if we're making decisions that are going to jeopardize the business and the services that we provide and the employees that we employ, we're not doing our job.
Yeah.
And so I think that the conversation with mom and dad in a setting like that is, you have good heart, you have good intentions, you understand why you're doing this, but let's fast forward in time. And I'm happy to talk to any of these clients at any time, because the reality is that business will be sold at some point. And we find that investors want to work with those that are working in the business, because they are the part of the reason why the business continues to be successful. And they are a great insurance policy to the continuity of those revenue streams. Those kids that are not active in the business, they want them off the cap table. And so, and I'm trying to touch on the logic of this, because this can be, this is an emotional topic.
Even with, frankly, husband and wife, or wife, wife and husband.
Yes.
We've got a client right now, very successful contractors, not in the roofing space, but in the custom homes. And they're not unlike many others who we get the request all the documents, and husband and wife are 50-50.
Yeah.
Which if husband is involved or wife is involved, equally great. But we often see where they're not involved. And the question is to the husband or wife, whoever is most involved, if you get sued, do you want your spouse involved in this lawsuit? And generally not. The uninvolved spouse isn't involved, doesn't want to be involved, and therefore, in our mind, most of the time, legally shouldn't be involved. And we see that a lot too. So we try to rectify that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. In some states, there's community property, and you have to deal
absolutely.
with that, of course. But yeah, I mean, it's a great point, and that I didn't even think to bring up, but you brought it up, and it's a fantastic point for that reason, because part of that, you have internal threats and you have external threats when you think about risk and liability. You can't predict all external threats, but you could quickly identify internal threats. You have more control over internal threats than anything, in my experience.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not easy.
Yeah.
It's not easy. Yeah.
I was just going to add we say that to our own firm, and we say this to our clients, that we will always do what's in the best interest of the firm.
Yeah.
The firm employs, 14 people, 14 families. And so as much as we love you, the firm is the most important. I think that has to be true for business. The company is what's important.
It's true for businesses at the privately held level. It's true for businesses that are backed by private capital, and it's true for businesses that are public. I was asked by Yahoo Finance this morning to write a quick article about hostile takeovers. And so, usually it's frowned upon, and the outside world looks at it like, oh, that's bad. That's what's going on there. And so what I really wanted to bring to the attention of everybody is that those hostile takeovers had that name and that brand. The reality is, if the current operators of that company are devaluing that company, or they're causing too much risk to that business, that's good in a public setting, because shareholders, they want to be aware of that, right?
Right.
And so sometimes these hostile takeovers are actually a good thing for that reason. There's also bad. I'm not going to ignore that.
Yeah.
There is bad. But there are situations where a company is undervalued, or they have too much debt, or fill in the blank, right? There's always a circumstance. And so we've seen hostile takeovers in a way where the company is turned around, it flourishes, it grows, shareholders are happy, public markets are happy. But that's why the federal government doesn't get involved in hostile takeovers.
Yep.
They make sure it's legal and legit and in compliance, but they don't have an opinion on if it's hostile or not.
Yes. What is it? Sunlight is I'm forgetting the term, but sometimes a little sunlight opens up
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
frameworks.
It does. It reveals everything,
Yeah.
right? So I want to come to some parting advice. You have a wealth of experience and wisdom and knowledge in this realm. But if you could give one, like just one piece of advice, parting advice to those that are tuned in and listening, whether they're approaching a liquidity event or if they're at their early stages of just understanding what this all means to them, what should they be thinking about and over the next few years and what should they do?
I'll try to relate it to just one thing, but if there was, apart from getting their planning in place, ultimately, no one should own any assets in their name,
Mm.
because if it's in their name, it's subject to probate, depending on the asset,
Mhm.
and it's susceptible to litigation or a lawsuit. And so you're protected when, gosh, if one of those two circumstances happen, and if everything is owned in an entity or in a trust or in an entity owned by a trust, then you're okay or going to be okay. And so that would maybe be the, if there was one piece of advice, is identify your assets, make sure they're all valued and make sure they're all transferred to the right structure. And if that's done, then they should be able to at least sleep a little bit better at night.
I love that parting advice. It reminded me of a gentleman I met years and years ago. And he was a very humble, successful businessman. He was a Christian guy that had a campus of buildings. One of those buildings he turned into an on-site church in his business. And I remember meeting him. I was younger. It was probably 20 years ago. And I was brought in to talk to him about selling the company. And he says, Brian, he says, this is not my company to sell. He's like, this is God's company. He's put me in charge of it.
Yeah.
And so those that understand, faith can relate to that. But even if you are not religious, you could still connect with that because to your advice and your parting advice is you don't own anything anyway, right? It's for the time we're here on earth. And if it's in your personal name, it's like a gallon of milk. Once it expires,
Yeah.
right? Once you expire as a human being, which we all will, unless we figure out some longevity secret here.
Yeah. You're doing a great job.
And then in that case, yeah, great. But the reality is you're going to have an expiration date. And to your point, if your name is tied to that, it's going to pull you in a probate. So it's brilliant advice to give. And I agree. Don't own anything. There's really an easier way of saying it's more complex and more structured, but don't own anything.
Yeah. And just one last thought is that it's really about, especially after an exit, it's about stewardship.
Yes.
And certainly how you deploy that new capital is part of that, but protecting it is as important as deploying it. And so, doing those things is part of that.
Yeah. Trav, thanks for being on this episode and sharing all of this information. We
Thank you.
appreciate you.
Yeah, appreciate very much
Yeah, of
the
course.
opportunity.
Yeah. So you worked hard to build the assets that you own. It's not as hard to protect those assets. If you want to connect with Travis, visit him at privatewealthgroup.com. We'll have some show notes for you to click on some links. And of course, if you're exploring exit readiness, pick up your copy of the book, Inevitable Exit, or visit us at meritage.partners. It's that simple, meritage.partners, and find one of our future events, whether that's virtual or in person. Well, we thank you for being here with us in this episode. I'm your host, Brian Franco, the M&A Guy. I'll see you next week.